Here we go.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar on vendor library work transitions, career roles, paths, and development opportunities. This webinar is sponsored by the Special Libraries Association's Leadership and Management Division. And with that being said, I wanted to ask everyone here, if you can type in the chat box, where are you from? You could put in your affiliation or your region. And this is also another sound check before we go live. Thanks. Great, we have folks from Louisiana, Canada, Pennsylvania, Delaware, South Carolina, California, Indiana, Massachusetts, DC. Oh, another person from California and Canada, Colorado. Great, so it sounds like we have many folks all over United States and Canada. That is excellent. Well, we really appreciate you joining this webinar, and really wanted to say a little bit about this section. So as I mentioned, I'm Ray Pun, and I am an academic librarian at the Alder Graduate School of Education in the Bay Area of California. And I'm also a member of the SLA Leadership and Management Division, which is sponsoring this webinar. And if you want to know more about this webinar, as well as the other ones we've done in the past, you're welcome to go to this link, sign up, be a member, and you can get all the documents here that will tell us about this program, this division, as well as the webinar itself. So we are really excited to have many folks here joining us for this session. So now I wanted to introduce to you our speakers. We have 4 folks. This is a panel discussion on how they have worked as a librarian and now transitioned into being a vendor professional, and to talk about that kind of work. So first we'll start with Jill. She is the Funding Solutions Marketing Manager and supports global promotions for Funding Institutional, Expert Lookup, and the Elsevier Fingerprint Engine. Prior to joining to Elsevier, Jill worked in training and sales marketing for LexisNexis, Dialog, and ProQuest, and among other organizations, including the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Jill serves on the board of directors for the SLA and holds degrees from Penn State, BA in International Politics, and the University of Pittsburgh for the Master of Library Science. Next, we have Amanda. In her role as a solutions consultant with Novoed, Amanda brings her experience with building e-learning platforms to the corporate learning space for adults. Amanda previously served as a product manager at Credo Reference, where she oversaw product development and customer service for multiple information literacy products, which provided instruction and assessment of IL and other related skills. Prior to joining Credo, Amanda served as library director for South University, where she spearheaded initiative as part of the QEP for SACS accreditation to standardize information literacy instruction across the general education curriculum at 14 campuses. Next, we have Michael Chu. He is currently the Director of Business Development and Library Relations for Atpon Systems. He is responsible for business development, marketing, outreach for academic, corporate, government, and special libraries across the globe. Prior to this, Michael was the Senior Global Library Relations Manager for ACS Publications, where he was responsible for library outreach and engagement. And prior to that, he was a Science and Engineering Librarian at the University of Southern California, working with students, faculty, and researchers in the fields of chemistry, chemical engineering, and material science. Next, we have Calvin. Calvin is a collection development manager with Gobi Library Solutions from EBSCO. He works with Gobi customers in the southwestern United States to achieve their library acquisitions goals by crafting specialized approval plans, training library staff, and helping libraries explore new acquisitions models. Prior to Gobi, Calvin worked at Santa Clara University as a paraprofessional in technical services, covering invoice, continuing resources, government documents, and managing student employees. Please join me in welcoming all of our stellar speakers. So this is the way we'll be doing it. I'll ask a question here, and then folks will take turns responding to such questions, and then hopefully it'll give you some insight here. So question 1, share with us a bit about your career paths and tell us when and why you decided to make the transition to work for a vendor. You know, we talked a little bit about it based on the biographies you've shared. But if there's something else you want to also include and explain why you made that transition, that'd be really, really helpful. We'll start with Jill and then go to Amanda, Michael, and Calvin. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So generally speaking, the majority of my more traditional library work, if you will, has been as a contract librarian in the U.S. government, including stints at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and until recently, the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. It was at NOAA that I made the decision to go from traditional librarian to vendor librarian. When I was at NOAA, I was very happy in my role. I was a solo. I got to start my own library, and my facility was located in Charleston, South Carolina. I mean, what's not to love, right? But my contract ended, and the library position went to an existing federal employee, and it's kind of like a game of musical chairs. Music stopped, and I didn't have a chair. So one day I received the bad news. On the same day, I had a LexisNexis update scheduled with one of the LexisNexis training consultants, Robin Toll, whom I'd met through the South Carolina SLA chapter meeting, which LexisNexis had sponsored, and it was actually held in my library. So when I, boo-hooed and shared my news with Robin, she suggested that I apply for an open position at the DC office of LexisNexis. Hearing her talk about what she did, training LexisNexis customers on LexisNexis services was really interesting to me. So I went ahead and applied, and the rest, as they say, is history. Since then, I've bounced back and forth and back and forth and back and forth between library jobs and vendor jobs. But I've worked in training, sales, and marketing on the vendor side, and I've worked with all sorts of customers, including librarians at labor unions, professional associations, news organizations, academics, government organizations, you name it, I've probably worked with them. I love that I get to use my traditional library skills, but in very different ways. But my most favorite part is that I get to help librarians. All of my jobs have come as a result of recommendations from my customers or from my account managers, which is kind of a funny but flattering career path.
Hi, this is Amanda De Federici, and I started my career, I thought, when I was a young kid going to college that I wanted to be a music teacher, actually. So I taught music for a few years and realized that I was just not a good fit for the classroom, but I wanted to stay in academia. So, and I'd had a really good experience working at a bookstore in college. So a friend suggested library school, and I found that was a really great fit. So I was started my library experience really as a cataloger, but was sort of in the right place at the right time to be promoted to a library director of a very small library at South University. And I really enjoyed the work in a small library. You get to wear a lot of hats. So in addition to all the administration and the budget and acquisitions, I was also doing a lot of information literacy, and that was really where my passion was, having come from a teaching background. And an opportunity came up for South University to beta test some new product offerings from Credo Reference. And this was really, I think back in like 2011, they were just starting to offer some services around creating videos and tutorials for information literacy. And we worked really closely with them to help them figure out, how that service should be offered and what made sense to do and not to do, what did libraries really actually need. And out of that experience of doing that beta testing, I was actually recruited to come. They were looking to add a librarian to their team to do instructional design and to help them with this new service and product they were releasing. So that's when I made the switch. I really, was very torn about it because I loved working in the library. I loved helping students, but I felt that it was an opportunity to do information literacy and this kind of outreach that I was very passionate about at a larger scale. You know, outside of just one university and touching many, many others. And, you know, I think one other thing is, you know, higher ed, the pace tends to be really slow, and, you know, it takes time, years to push big initiatives through. And I was really excited about trying something with a faster pace. And working for a vendor is certainly that. Light years difference in terms of that from my personal experience. So those are the main reasons why I left. I think also, you know, I was in particular, the company I went to, vendor I went to, had a lot more flexibility for my own personal life. So that was a major factor as well. But really, I think what I enjoyed most about it was, like Jill said, getting to work directly with librarians and support them and take all of that experience that I'd had but apply it to now, how do I help these people in their own situations? So I would say that's has been really rewarding in this type of career. And on to you, Michael.
All right, thanks, Amanda, and Jill as well. And I want to thank everybody for attending. I know hearing from a couple of us is either a good way to start your morning or start your afternoon, depending on your time zone. But so I had a little bit of a different career path becoming a librarian. I actually studied chemistry as an undergraduate, and I was planning on going to medical school. And then I realized I didn't like biology, which is, I think, a huge part about being a doctor. So somewhere between sophomore, junior year of college, I had to make a decision on what I was going to do. And I didn't really want to stay much longer. I didn't want to do more than the 4 years. So I decided to stick it out with chemistry, but I needed to find something else I wanted to do after I graduated, because I also didn't want to be a chemist anymore. So I had this vivid memory of my senior year in college, flipping a coin on application day that I started my applications, and I was either going to go for a Master's of Education or an MLIS because of various career experiences I had both in college and growing up. And so I ended up going to library school, and I will say I have been very, very lucky. I was able to find a job right away after library school to be a chemistry librarian. I did that for about 2.5, 3 years. And the couple things I really enjoyed were kind of engaging with researchers, engaging with students, engaging with other librarians, service to the profession. But I really hated university bureaucracy. And I worked at a large private university, and there was a lot of that bureaucracy. And so I was actually really lucky. Part of my job was to engage with vendors that kind of fell into my subject areas. And actually my sales rep, who came and visited once a year, emailed me and said, you know, when I worked at the previous job I had was at the American Chemical Society. They were saying that they needed to hire a librarian who would be interested in library relations. So working with librarians across the globe to engage with them and make sure that their needs are being met, and to help promote not only the journals and the subscriptions that they sell, but also a lot of the services and free offerings that come from the society. And so at that point, you know, I actually, you know, packed up shop in Southern California and moved to Washington, D.C. to take this job. And it wasn't, you know, I've been torn about this for the last several years. I did that job for about 4 years, and I've been in my current job for about 6 months. But it was really just an opportunity to do something new, right? There's something on that horizon that has a job description that's got a couple of those phrases and sentences. You're like, that seems really interesting, something I'd love to try, or something I'd really love to do. And so that's kind of what sparked my interest, kind of moving around. And to Amanda's point as well, these roles that I've taken, the job at the American Chemical Society, and most recently now this job at Adipon, has really been about a lot of kind of personal life flexibility. You know, I'm I'm a part of a two-body problem, and so when my spouse needs to move, or she has a job that transfers her location once every couple of years, the ability to have a flexible position that allows you kind of work from home, that allows you to kind of work from multiple different major cities has been really useful. And so that was kind of a big factor in kind of leaving the traditional library position. With that, I know there are other questions, so I'll stop rambling, but I'll turn it over to Calvin.
Thank you, Michael. So I think my kind of career path that kind of led me to a vendor is very different from the previous speakers in that I was never really a true librarian in the job title sense. I got my MLIS while I was working as a paraprofessional at Santa Clara University in technical services, which was really just a wonderful experience just because working kind of at a smaller school really gives you the opportunity to wear many hats. So I got a taste of kind of what it was like to be a librarian in that I could, sit in on instructional sessions and kind of help the librarian evaluate how they're doing. I got to do reference. It was just a really great experience in that sense. But I think I started out kind of in libraries the way a lot of paraprofessionals do. Maybe you're, a student worker at a college library, and so that's kind of what happened with me. I used to be a student worker in the circulation department, and then kind of after I graduated, I really wasn't sure what to do because I had majored in a foreign language, and I thought about going to teach, and I kind of had to make the decision about whether I wanted to kind of leave my, where I was living and with my family, and go to a foreign country, or try to find something that was local that I could kind of stay nearby. And I was very fortunate in that the library I was working for was able to hire me kind of as like a contract staff position. So I was able to stay and kind of do that and work kind of on the back end of things, kind of in a technical services withdrawal project. And when that contract ended, I was kind of not really sure what to do. So I did some few other kind of odd jobs, but eventually made my way back to libraries, but this time in kind of a access services public facing role, which was very different from what I was used to in the past. Like, even though I worked in circulation, I wasn't a public facing employee in that sense. So I learned a lot in that job, and it really taught me that there is a lot more to the library world than just kind of the small slice that I had experienced. And so from there, I was able to then go on to Santa Clara. And what kind of really pushed me to go on the vendor side was I felt like I had kind of experienced so many different parts of the library world, both, public facing and kind of more on the back end side of things. And I felt like there's this whole other part to libraries that when I was in library school and even when I was working in a library, there wasn't ever really much thought about kind of the vendor side of things and how a lot of libraries couldn't function without vendors. Just the amount of services that are offered there really helps libraries and helps us do what we love to do, which is, to help our patrons. And so that's why it kind of thinking about all the great services that we were getting from Govi at the time when I was working at Santa Clara, when the opportunity kind of came out that our rep was retiring, and she had reached out to my manager and was like, hey, do you know anyone who might be interested in this job? And he offered, to, connect us. And that really, knowing that the vendor world was so big really pushed me to be like, hey, maybe I'll explore this now that I've done kind of a lot in the, academic library world, the different departments in it. I thought it would be interesting to try something new.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for your interesting and unique responses. I found some threads which I'll talk about in a bit. leads me to this other question, the skills and opportunities. What did you gain from working in a vendor role? And I know some of you sort of talked a little bit about it, but if you want to expand on it for those listening who have never worked at a vendor, that would be helpful. We'll start with Amanda, Michael, Calvin, and then Jill.
Yeah, so I've learned a lot working at a vendor, and in part because I've had so many different positions. When I first joined Credo, I was doing instructional design, which felt, very familiar. But then very quickly became a product owner and a product manager. But being at a small company, again, I was wearing a lot of hats. So I was working with customer success teams. I was working with the sales and marketing teams very closely. Also working with our developers who were in Russia. So there was a lot to learn there. But I think a couple key things was, and I feel like a lot of these, I sort of had the seeds of these coming from a library already, but I needed to formalize them a bit more and develop in them. And I would say one of the most important is how to make a business case for something. When I was in libraries, I would often think, I've got this exciting idea. Let me write out a plan for what we'll do, and then I'll share that and try to get permission and some funds to do it. And what working in a vendor really taught me is that there's another step that comes before that, and that's making a case. So I was really lucky to have a very good manager and mentor who coached me through several of these, and I developed sort of a template there where you have to think about, what problem are we actually solving here, and what's the return on the investment we'll put into it, and how much is it going to cost us, and what's our estimated timeline, how many resources are we going to use, and putting that kind of thinking into a problem before you rush to I think it's really figuring out why you want to solve a problem and what you think you're going to do before you rush to how am I going to solve this. And I think I found a lot more success by taking those initial steps and sort of training myself to think in that way. But there's a lot of other things, that come with working with a vendor, like just very good project management skills. And also, I think communication was a big issue as well. I felt like I was a very strong communicator coming out of a library because, you're working with faculty, you're working with students at all varying levels. But I think I even honed that more working in a vendor, because you have to be able to speak to, an agitated customer. And then, 15 minutes later, you might have to speak to your CEO. And you have to know how to very concisely and very carefully craft your message. And then it's really, I think, learning the skill of pitching. How do you pitch to a CEO or a C-level person? And I think an early mistake I made was just flooding them with too much information, because I'm a librarian. That's what I do. But you really have to learn what's most important to share when you're communicating with others, and how to really use as few words as possible in some cases. So to get your message across. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I think, again, some of that was already there coming from my experience in the library, but it just needed to be honed a bit more.
So I will say that a lot of what Amanda has mentioned are kind of the things that I've had to learn as well. I was lucky that when I came into my first vendor position, I was one of a good number of employees. There were a good chunk of us, and I felt like I was more of an in-between. I was more of a translator. I was more of a person who, provided advice to the sales team, provided advice to our marketing and development staff and our digital content people about, the library perspective, issues or troubles that are happening in libraries that we had to be aware of. I think being in a publishing space is a little bit different. It's not just the content and the issues, but also there's always the financial side of it too. And a lot of things about open access and a lot of other fun stuff that could be its own 10 webinar series, so we'll not get into that. But I think the big part for me was learning to be kind of a project manager without being a project manager, I guess, is probably the best way to describe it. Also, the global perspective. I think, one thing is although I did work in Southern California as a librarian, it was a very diverse culture, diverse area. It isn't really, I didn't get a true appreciation of the diversity of the profession until I took my first vendor job. I had the opportunity to give presentations in Southeast Asia to librarians in Vietnam and in Malaysia, and got a chance to go to Hong Kong and China and kind of all over Europe as well. It provided me a real different perspective and understanding and appreciation of the library profession beyond what we, I think, kind of see here in the U.S. So global perspective, that global understanding, I think was a great opportunity that I've, at least, or skill that I've learned. There's also just kind of the business nature, and that comes with kind of my new job. So about 6 months ago, I took this job at Adipon, a company that has pretty much primarily worked with publishers till now, and we're most only recently kind of entering the library sphere, and my job is to kind of oversee a lot of that kind of product development and that kind of entry into the market. But for them, it's, I've had to learn a lot about basic business skills and basic, writing, not even proposals, but doing, financial outlooks and all that kind of stuff. And so it's really provided a whole new thing that I've had to kind of embrace, on top of, doing the marketing and the sales and the product development and all that kind of other fun stuff that I've done before. Sorry, I'm just kind of looking through my notes here. The other thing I was going to mention is just kind of an appreciation and kind of a better understanding of the entire publishing and research ecosystem. As a librarian, I think you see a part of it. You educate your students and researchers on kind of that research ecosystem, but kind of being on this side of the line, you kind of see a whole nother side of it. There's a huge perspective in the amount of work it takes to either publish content or develop software to publish that content, or to be able to design something that will be used in a library or within the instructional setting. So I think that's been a huge kind of eye-opening. I wouldn't say it's a skill, but it's definitely been a huge opportunity to kind of see into that side of it too, and to realize that a publication or the research is still only a small piece of the huge enterprise and huge system that kind of runs it. So, and I'll turn it over to Calvin.
Thank you. So kind of, I would say the most obvious for me, the greatest opportunity I got in moving to the vendor side was I get to work from home. But that is also a skill in itself, because you have to work from home. I think even though I did my MLIS program online, I felt like I did have a little bit of a base, okay, you have to be self-motivated. You have to have initiative to do these things that are required of you without anyone kind of, looking over your shoulder. And that was, I thought I was prepared for this job, but when you have to do 8 hours a day, self-motivation and initiative, it is a challenge, because, the place where you live is also the place where you work. And it's sometimes hard to separate those two parts of, who you are. When does work end? When does my personal life begin? And when can I turn off work from my personal life? And I think that was a struggle initially that I had to overcome when I was kind of getting into this job. But I think it is a very important skill that I was able to develop for this job. And so one of the kind of greatest opportunities other than that is that I get to see and work with so many libraries in my area. So I've been to about 70 different libraries in my region now. I love libraries. I love going there. I love seeing all the students there, and all the different architecture. It's just such a wonderful opportunity to go and see all these places that I probably would never have seen otherwise. And I also, in that same vein of things, get to see how libraries do so many different things, sometimes in the same way, sometimes very differently. So it exposes me to a lot of ways of thinking about library process and things like that. I've also been like really fortunate in that I've got to travel, outside of my region and see places that I probably would never have been to, like Nebraska, and Tennessee. I've been to Nashville. I went up to Oregon. A lot of these places that like I probably would never have had reason to go to, but I'm really glad that I did get to do that through this job. And like, yes, you're there for work, but can also, like I said, that kind of work-life balance, you get to experience all the places that you go for work. So that's really wonderful. So definitely, I would say those are the greatest opportunities that you can get from working on a vendor. I'll pass it off to Jill now.
Thanks, Calvin. I think some of the skills and opportunities I've experienced are very similar to what Amanda, Michael, and Calvin expressed. One thing that I think has made a big difference, both personally and professionally, is that my confidence has really increased. I think part of that was when I joined LexisNexis, I was 25. I was just a couple years out of library school. I've always been a bit more of an introvert, and I was forced to be more comfortable with myself, if you will, in the LexisNexis sales environment and working with customers. I had to develop superior oral presentation skills and just be more poised and confident than I typically had, especially as a solo librarian, where I got to stay in my office, and a lot of my work was remote, working with scientists out in the field. I think another area that was enhanced working with a vendor is that I developed more business acumen. Some of my responsibilities or experience have been developing business cases that, as Amanda mentioned, were geared to the C-suite. I had to speak in their language. I had to be more succinct than I normally would otherwise have been. And that was definitely a skill that I had to develop in order to succeed in that capacity. I had to develop project management skills, strategic planning, and also accountability, especially with metrics. I'm not a math major, so math has never been my strong suit. When I see numbers, I kind of panic, and I had to overcome all of that in order to speak more comfortably, more confidently about how my, for example, marketing programs were making a difference in terms of revenue generation. And then lastly, one of the things that I've definitely loved about my position is I get to work with people across markets and also geographic boundaries. So as the others have shared, my roles have taken me in very different directions. I've always, mostly have worked as a government library, mostly within the US government, but working in the capacity at Elsevier that I am now, I get to work with foreign governments above and beyond the US government. I get to work with different universities inside the United States as well as internationally. I get to work with not just librarians, but for example, people in the research development office, such as research development professionals. This is a whole new world to me, and I've really enjoyed that. In addition to working with international colleagues and customers. This morning when I was on a conference call, my whole team is in Amsterdam. I'm the only one who's in North America. I'm the only one for whom English is a first language. I'm the only American on the team. So there are a lot of kind of interesting cultural experiences working with my team. But I love them dearly. I learn from them all the time. And I think that's a unique opportunity working for a global vendor.
Great. Thank you all for sharing your perspectives on the skills and opportunities you've been developing and gained over time. And it sounds really interesting to hear the different communities you're able to build and leveraging the communication skills and so on. So we're going to pivot to the third question here, which is, what kind of exciting projects are you working on right now in your position? So it could be something long-term, short-term. If you have something you'd like to share that would be something you're working on alone or in a team, we're open to that. So we'll start with Michael, Calvin, Jill, and then Amanda. Thanks.
So, like I mentioned, I've been at my job for about 6 months, and if any of you aren't aware, I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning. So, Adapon is we're a tech company that focuses on publishing platforms and tools. So, a lot of the major publishers in the world use a good handful of them use our platform as their mechanism to deliver content. And so our company is really kind of taking a step back. And when I was hired 6 months ago, was to kind of take a view at, they work exclusively with publishers right now. They host content that is sold and utilized by libraries and by researchers. Is there any way that we, as a publishing company or software company, could also help libraries? And so a huge part of my job has been exploring the library market to kind of see where can a third party, organization that hasn't directly worked with libraries in the past, but has, obviously served a lot of their interests via kind of our customers. So our publishing customers often bring us feedback from their library customers about issues and concerns and things that need to be done. So can we somehow not circumvent, and that's not really the idea, but offer additional services or offer additional tools or resources? So I don't have a particular project that I'm working on right now. A lot of what I've been doing right now is market research and market analysis. Again, those other skills that you kind of have to pick up, but the ability to kind of figure out where I'm supposed to tell my company to go and where we're supposed to position ourselves. It's again, I think it's been mentioned earlier, is that you really do have to kind of learn how to stand up in a room and make a presentation. I still remember my job interview where I had both our chairman, the general manager, and 3 senior VPs in a room to pitch as to why you want to do something. And so it really teaches you a lot. So unfortunately, I don't have a specific project, but it's all about the foundation that kind of leads up to hopefully what we hope will be products and services that will offer libraries in the next insert time range, because we don't know yet. But so I will pass it. I'll pass it on to Calvin.
Thank you. So I like to think of kind of my core job as a bunch of projects that I'm working on with each library. So kind of every time I go see a library or work with a librarian, it kind of is a project in itself, because kind of the core of Gobi product is that we do the approval plans, whether or not they have an auto ship component, if they're just slips, things like that. So my role is to really help libraries craft those plans. And if you think kind of what the plan is at the heart, it's basically a tangible, like visible representation of what it is a library is trying to collect. Not just like the subject, but, non-subject parameters about the book. So does your library take oversized items? Is there a place in your library for that? Do you know how to handle those kind of things? Are you willing to take staple down things? So it's kind of a fun thing to sit down with a librarian and kind of define what it is in your subject area even that you're collecting, and how does that fit into the larger picture with your whole library as to what the library is interested in collecting and what are the library's collection goals. So like, while I'm not working, kind of like Michael, I'm not working on any particular project right now, I do see kind of every interaction I have with a library as a project. And that's why it's very exciting, because I have many things going on at once, kind of depending on what the library needs. Sometimes we're looking at kind of newer acquisition methods like evidence-based acquisition. or demand driven, those kind of things. So it's very exciting because every library kind of has a different approach to how they want to do something. And I feel like it's kind of my role to kind of look out in the publishing world and see how can we get those things to the right people and to the right readers. And I'll pass that off to Jill now.
Thank you. So I'm a marketing manager at Elsevier, and my core products are the funding solutions, as Ray mentioned. So my experience is more so working with product, working with upper level management, sales, and customers. I have a lot of stakeholders. So work-wise, sometimes it feels like I'm drinking from a fire hose. Much like working in a library, there's never a dull moment. So my to-do list for this week looks like this. I'm working on competitive profiles, looking at the different services from different companies that are kind of in our same space. I have to figure out how to get ethically access to their services so I can kind of do a comparative analysis between our solutions and their solutions and develop internal kind of like educational pieces for our sales teams so that they are better prepared to respond to competitive comparisons by their customers. I'm working on a poster and a presentation that my product manager for one of my projects will be presenting at 2 upcoming conferences, one here in the States and the other one in Canada. So they need to be a little more specific, obviously, to the audiences to which you'll be presenting. And there are some differences in the way research developers seek funding in the US versus Canada, and that needs to be represented in the presentation. I'm also working on an email campaign with my marketing communications team that will invite customers to provide feedback via survey, which I also have to develop and then execute. I'm working on product release notes for enhancements to one of my products for both sales and customers. I'm working on content acquisition. In fact, this morning I was able to hire a library student intern to help us with some analysis of content. And then I'll also be conducting demo presentations for prospective customers in Peru, Colombia, and England. And I still have lots of 2020 planning to do. So it's really a mixed bag. But I think you can see from that experience where my traditional library skills really fit in very nicely. With competitive profiles, it's taking a look at different products and figuring out which one is best in which areas, which ones have more intuitive user interface, which one has the more comprehensive data, where's the data quality from one to the next. And then distilling all that information into concise but informative formats that are kind of, if you will, rip and run for my sales teams. With the email campaign and the survey, back in the day when I worked in a library, we did the occasional survey, but this requires different skills trying to solicit information from people who are, really busy doing their own thing. And the last thing they want to do is open marketing-ish email from Elsevier. So I have to use very strongly persuasive language. My questionnaire has to be short, but detailed enough to solicit the information that we're hoping will help us to improve our services. So there are a lot of synergies between our library skills and what I'm doing as a marketing manager.
Hi, this is Amanda. So as Ray mentioned, I did recently take a new position at a company called NovoEd, and it's outside of higher ed and library. So that in itself is a big change. And the type of work I'm doing is a small segment of what I was doing before at Credo, but I assist the sales team when they are talking to prospective customers. I'm there to provide expertise about instructional design and the product. And it's been exciting to learn more about the learning and development space in corporate learning. And I'm excited to learn more about the software that we're providing. It's sort of like a mix between a learning platform, but also social media. So that's been really interesting to get to become familiar with something that's going to be that's meant for adult learners, really. So that's what I'm focusing on, and really learning a new product and learning an entirely new market. So that's just kind of how it goes in business. Sometimes you're those kind of big overwhelming challenges. It takes a while to absorb all of that new information and feel really comfortable in it. Back
Great.
to you, Ray.
Thanks, Amanda, and everyone. It's very interesting to hear the different types of work you're doing and how it relates to really keeping up with the trends in the profession and in the field. So we have this last question here, and then we'll jump into Q&A. If you can keep your responses a little bit brief so we can have more time for Q&A, that'd be great. Mm-hmm. So question is, what advice do you have for folks who are not sure if they want to join the vendor side? What would you recommend? So we'll start with Calvin, Jill, Amanda, and then Michael. Thanks.
So I think my biggest recommendation for folks who might not be sure if they want to go to the vendor is to really kind of examine, like, why is it that you don't want to go to the vendor side? Are you concerned that it's going to set you down a career path that you might not be able to get back into libraries, or kind of really examine that? Because once you kind of know what it is that's kind of holding you back, I think you can actually then look to see kind of what other people have done. Because I know kind of in our company, there are a lot of folks who have come from libraries, go back to libraries, after a few years come back to the vendor side. And all of that kind of exchange of perspectives from the library side to the vendor side are appreciated in both places. So for instance, when they hired me, they really liked that I was coming from a library, especially a library that was using the product already. So having that knowledge really helps inform and kind of set you up for success in your vendor role. So don't feel like just because it's a little more corporate or business that you can't bring a perspective, because you can definitely bring a very important perspective to that role. Okay. Jill?
I think first thing, you need to be comfortable with the business side of our industry. There's no us versus them. We're all in this together, vendors and librarians, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. We need each other. And I take great pride, for example, that my employer is engaged in advancing scientific discovery and innovation, and I get to help towards those goals. I think you need to take an assessment of your skills and how they may transfer. So I guess by degree and by practice, I'm a reference librarian and a STEM librarian. I love the hunt for the hard to find, and I love training to help people maximize their time savings and the efficiency of doing their searches so that they can get the information that they need and then get on with the rest of their work. And so just these two examples of things that I love are what kind of uniquely identified me as a good candidate when I first started at LexisNexis. They also loved the fact that I was very involved in SLA. And again, I got my job through an SLA meeting with the South Carolina chapter. So I think that the fact that I was a librarian and I understood how libraries worked and I had this global network at my fingertips through SLA were definitely things that were appealing to a prospective vendor employee. And then finally, talk to some of your reps and find out what they like, as well as what they don't like about their jobs. Cast a really wide net. Talk to folks who are with and without library degrees. There are a lot of us librarians out there in vendor land, and in diverse companies, including publishers or aggregators, software, also library personnel companies. This will kind of help you to figure out what kind of opportunities are there out there for us and which ones might be best for you. I'd also note that you want to be very kind to your vendor friends, because you never know if this is the path you take. They could be your referrals. They could serve as recommendations for you. They could also be your coworkers. And this is a very, very transient industry. We all run into each other at conferences. It's kind of like a great big reunion, because we, at some point, have either worked with one another or sold against one another. So I definitely throw that out there too.
Hey, this is Amanda. I would say, I completely agree with Jill. Talk to your reps. I mean, get to know more about the reality of what it's like to work at a company, especially from people who are there. I would also say, one thing to keep in mind is that when you're looking at different vendors, think about what style really fits you. Do you like, a smaller atmosphere where there's, a bit of flatter organization and, but it's, maybe a bit more fast paced. That can be a lot of fun and more like a startup mode, but also, what's your tolerance for ambiguity and, and change, because that also comes with that. And I would say, think about larger organizations, maybe a bit more stable, but also maybe a bit more bureaucracy. So I think it really helps to kind of dive in and do some sleuthing about what the culture is really like. I would also say too, and this is my personal approach when I'm looking, as I just changed from one industry to another, is look at those job descriptions that are out there and think to yourself, how do I translate that into, the things that they're looking for? Am I actually doing that now? A lot of things there, you learn so much from working in a library, and your skills are way more versatile than you think. So, but you may call it something in the library world and it's called something else in the vendor world. So I just did a lot of almost textual analysis of looking at job postings and looking for the similarities and the trends and what are they actually looking for, and does that actually relate to a skill that I already have or some aspect of my job that I already enjoy doing. So I wish more vendors would hire librarians, not just in library vendors, but other companies as well. I think we have so much to offer because we have such a broad skill set that really can be applied to anything.
I think the only thing I have to add, and I'm looking at the clock and I know we only have 6 minutes left, is just the network piece. Whether it, and this echoes of what everyone else has pretty much said, is whether it's engaging with people, asking questions, just getting to know people, keeping a positive relationship, because you never know who you're going to end up working with or supervising or working under. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest piece I have to add to what's already been said. And I'll back to you, Ray, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, and everyone. So there is already one question that we could respond. This is a question about the skills, right? So the presenters talked about what they've learned working for vendors, but what skills and experiences did they already have that the vendors were looking for? Would anyone like to respond to that?
I mean, I can. So kind of, I touched a little bit on this when I was talking about kind of this last question, but just the fact that I worked in a library in technical services, so I have that kind of technical services background. Like I understand like MARC, I know how ILSs work, those kind of things. Those are really instrumental when you're going to a vendor, I think, because there are going to be a lot of people at vendors who may not have worked at a library before. and the only time they ever step foot in a library might be for work. So they don't really have a very deep understanding of kind of what's happening on the back end of things. And knowing, kind of just having that knowledge will really kind of make you, I think, better positioned when you do enter the vendor world. And yeah.
So I can add, Amanda had noted this in her chat posting. I had been a library manager and director at different points before moving into different vendor roles. And I think the couple things that they really liked about my resume, my skills and experiences, were really understanding how libraries work in terms of budgeting, collection development, rolling out content to end users and supporting end users, and how librarians themselves use those services. This is more on a content side. I will say too, that at each of my places of employment, Dialogue, ProQuest, Lexis, or Elsevier, librarians who work for those vendors are very often seen as like celebrities. Sales in particular, but also marketing and product, are constantly seeking their internal librarians' input for how things work in a library. So our perspectives and our advantages are sought after to try to help the company move on and develop better services and solutions for customers. So again, I think that ability to communicate, the ability to kind of look at things from a high, like bird's eye perspective and distill down are definitely things that I was able to do as a library director and continue to benefit me now in my current role at Elsevier.
Great, thanks. I also wanted to add that Amanda had left the response, and here is her response. I'm happy to add my perspective on the skills that I brought from the library. Definitely the ability to budget from managing our acquisitions budget, ability to communicate effectively at different levels, project management, instruction, teaching, which is applicable to nearly everything, and also discovery, reference, interview, how to uncover what a person really needs versus what they're asking for. So that's for those who may have missed that comment. Any other last thoughts or comments before we wrap up? Well, with that being said, I want to thank our 4 speakers, Jill, Amanda, Michael, Calvin, for giving us this time to speak with us and share with us their backgrounds, their work as a vendor, and all the stuff that they've been doing recently. And I also want to thank my co-chair, Rebecca Jones, who is behind the scenes setting up the webinar platform and very helpful to ensure that this was possible. And I would like to thank all of our attendees for making it to the session, and hopefully you learned something great. And feel free to look us up at sla.org. This is the Leadership and Management Division, and you'll find out more about these opportunities as well as other resources that we'll provide. Thanks, and I hope everyone have a great day.